Welcome to the Cash Flow Project Podcast. Are you looking to better your financial situation by increasing your cash flow? Too busy to hunt for real estate deals or don't know where to start? Then you're in the right spot. Join us as we dive in and talk about investing for cash flow using multifamily real estate.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Project. I'm your host, Vince Gethings with Tri-City Equity Group. And today our guest is Denis Shapiro. Welcome to the show. Denis is the founder and managing member of SIH Capital Group and author of the Alternative Investment Almanac. Denis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you guys for having me on.
Excellent. So we talked a little bit before we got started, bunch of interesting things you have going on. Let's just start background from, looks like you got started in 2012. Let's get into, how you got into real estate investing and where you're at now.
Sure. So I started investing in 2004 with traditional, stocks and bonds. I was in high school at the time. My oldest brother gave me a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad. I actually hated the book just because I was a little naive and thought that he made more money from his tours, from his booking tours than actually the stuff in the book. I full, 180 later on in my life on that book. But I read the book. I was like, okay, I have a part-time job. I should probably buy an asset. So I did get that main core, philosophy out of that. And I bought my first mutual fund. And I think I paid like $7 in commissions. This was like a time where I'm old enough to say there's a time where you actually paid commissions on stock trades. And I remember I held that thing for a whole year. It didn't move anywhere. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do it. That's kind of like sometimes I'm lucky that sometimes some investments go bad because it lets you tinker the strategy. So I went the whole stock picking route. I went to college with the intentions of just going into some kind of portfolio management on the whole stock side. And I got hit right with the global financial crisis where I was going to some job interviews. And it was by the time I got to the third, fourth interview, the company was no longer in business. So I was approaching my end of my senior year and I didn't have any job offers. So I was like, okay, what should I do? So I was like, all right, let me go get my MBA. And while I went and got my MBA, I got recruited for the government. And I remember the first paycheck I got, I was like, wow, they're not only my employer, they're my business partner. So I quickly started researching what should I invest in to actually lower my tax liabilities and everything like that. And that's what got me in the rabbit hole of alternative investments. I started off with a single family rental, made every mistake known to man, every mistake known to every investor in single family rentals, bad area, low income, didn't screen, didn't do anything right. I bought it from a family member. It was like the epitome of a bad deal. But it allowed me to say hey, I don't really want to do this, but I do like the passive side of, getting a rent check every single month. So I went down the different alternative asset holes. I went through note funds, ATM funds. Then I kind of stumbled onto more syndications with apartment buildings. And once I really got into the syndications of apartment buildings, I felt like my whole world, I call it the gateway drug of investments, because once you get in there, the networking and everything else that you do, it takes you down so many different paths. So I know I said a lot, so I'll back up and go over anything that you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, a bunch there. I think the first thing that I picked up on that was that first property, and a lot of people that haven't invested in real estate or haven't made the jump yet are so fearful of what happens if I mess up? You're gonna mess up. It's guaranteed. You're going to screw a lot of things up. Do that on a smaller property. My I call it my sandbox property was a 4-unit, and I made a lot of mistakes. I over renovated it and did all this stuff. But you're not going to go bankrupt on a 4-unit in the Midwest. Yeah, you might take some bumps and bruises, but you're going to get through it. You can probably sell it for at least, not lose money. And you learned all these valuable tools and built some systems, built some processes, understood how, what your risk tolerance is as an investor. And then now you can scale and use that to bigger properties. So a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines because I don't want to mess up, my first deal. I'm it's going to happen. Just do your first deal small. And then that way you can learn all those things and then get it out of the way on a smaller property where it's not going to, bankrupt you. And then just quickly get out of that as fast as possible. 1 or 2 years in the small property and then scale up as fast as possible out of that. So that was one thing I picked up from that story. That sounds like you did that first property and then blasted out of there and are doing a whole bunch of things now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's just any investment, whether it's a single family investment or you do a stock investment or any, even I would say even invest in your first syndication.
Mhm.
The minimums are higher from, that side of things, but the first deal is probably going to be bad. You probably don't know how to look at the deal and everything like that, but you need that first deal to do your second and so on and so on. And, that's really the best learning curve there is. I think I really went over this in my book where, like, what happens if you don't do any of the investing yourself and you just give it to a third party?
Yep.
It obviously feels better. It feels more comfortable. But what happens if after a year or two, you're not happy with them? All you end up doing is firing them and hiring someone else where you have not learned anything of value from that experience, versus if you handle kind of your investments and you do some of these different type of alternative investments, after a year or so at least you can look back and say, like, okay, what did I do right, what did I do wrong? And that experience is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just being able to analyze deals. Like you said, you might mess up the first one, but if you pay attention to what you're doing, read some books on how to analyze deals, ask questions, and even on the LP side, limited partner side of like a syndication, that's still pretty active in the beginning because you still have to vet the sponsors, vet the deal, vet the market, vet the business plan, know how to understand their business plan and their pro formas. But once you figure that out, it's like the sky's the limit because now you're not tasked by time. It's you can just, because they're doing all the work, right? So it's like you can just crank these things out once you crack the Rubik's cube there. So it's like you said, yeah, just get into the first one, and then sky's the limit after that. So in here, you talk about alternative investments in your book. I mean, Alternative Investment Almanac. What are some of the things in that book that you teach the readers?
Yeah, so my main thing was that I kept having these conversations with two different types of investors. The first was one more the traditional stocks and bonds. And the moment I mentioned what an alternative investment is, or that you could invest in an apartment building or something like that, their eyes would like glaze and they would think it's like a Ponzi scheme,
Yep.
because it's a private security. It's so like, there's almost like this conditioning out there that the only other alternative investments really mean like Bitcoin and Tesla stock somehow. And, so I was never really, like, I wouldn't be able to continue a conversation because it felt like I was just, beating a drum at that point. And then on the alternative side, I would meet people who just, invest in thousands of apartment buildings, and they're like, well, this is so much better than traditional stock, so I don't mess with that. So I really wrote the book to kind of show how you could create a portfolio where you could spend 1% of your brain power to, invest in like a low cost index fund, and you'll reap the benefits of 100-year track record of doing pretty damn well. And then on the flip side, now because your brain power is at a minimal here, you could spend that a time the 99% of your other brain doing the alternative investments. Because I just love the fact that you came out and said how active it is up until the point you wire the money, right? Because there's this big misconception out there that this is 100% passive. It is after you wire the money, but before the point of wiring that money, like what you said, you have to learn how to, network with other LP investors and network with operators, and being able to look at a business plan and evaluate the merits of how many different levers they're going to have to pull to execute on this big business plan. And there's just so much things like that, like the due diligence and underwriting to get to that point. That takes a lot more time than invest in an index fund and forget it. So I wanted to write a book to show how you could kind of set and forget it on the traditional side, so you could save your time and energy and effort for this whole world of non-Ponzi scheme assets. Now, are there Ponzi scheme operators out there in these asset classes? Yes, but it's the same thing as saying, because Enron and WorldCom happened, I never want to invest in a stock. they're just bad apples in that field. So that's why I really wanted to write the book. The book has some of the bigger assets that, we're familiar with, like apartment buildings, but then there's all these different derivatives of apartment buildings, which I call, self-storage and mobile home park, where once you learn the language of an apartment building, you could kind of be a passive investor on the self-storage side, because the same cap rates, NOI, you kind of hear the same terms. So once you learn that language, you could apply it easier. Then I did some other things that kept coming up in the real estate investment circles that I'm involved in, like high equity cash value, life insurance policies, otherwise known as like the infinite bank concepts and be your own bank. That's used a lot by real estate investors, where they'll build up these policies. I don't want to get too much into them, but then they'll use the cash value in these policies to buy other assets. So I did life insurance policies. Another one I came across with is life insurance settlements, which is really cool. It's pretty morbid, but it's the ability basically to invest in funds that own collections of life insurance policies, usually of a very elderly group. Like the ones I see is like over 90 years old or something like that. So this way you kind of get exposure and this diversification for something that's not related on the stock market or real estate. It's completely separate. And it kind of depends on, unfortunately people dying, but that's just the asset class. I did something for startups, because a lot of the real estate investors I was interacting with had some kind of like software engineering background. They had some kind of engineering background, where a lot of them, that surprisingly high amount of people in my network were, investing in a good chunk of their network into actual tech startups. So there were all these different things. The other ones I did was mobile home park, self-storage. I think I mentioned that. I did a multi-asset funds, because funds are becoming extremely popular these days, where if the operator is not doing a fund, there's funds of funds. And, I think the last few years has really seen like a fund explosion type of thing. So those are basically, I believe I have 8 to 9 assets in my book.
And Dennis, I'm going to have to get that book into the hands of some of my friends, because we were just talking about this. Is like, I do have a circle that's always talking about like making the next dollar and getting paid. And I'm like, well, here's the strategy that I'm doing, and here's the reasons why it's better than everything you're doing. And then it's just like they shut down, and their aperture is just so small they can't see why. I'm like, I just want to pull my hair out.
It's frustrating. But then, you get to the point where you realize you're preaching to the wrong circle, right? You're preaching to just that's what it is. That's why we're out here. That's why we have we go on podcasts. That's why we write books. We want to educate people that want to actually learn about this stuff. Going to a barbecue, they feel like you're almost selling them something, and their minds just go. And you're not Matt, my friend for 20 years. You're Matt, like the traveling salesman right now. So I've kind of the last few years I've kind of hit that same boat, where I try not to even mention like, hey, I'm doing this and this, because they know I'm doing it at this point. So if they're ready to actually invest or whatever it is, then they'll come to me at this point. But yeah, there've been some awkward conversations where mentally I have to say like, hey, this is just not the right group for that conversation.
So when you're like just avoiding your kind of warm leads, all your friends and family, how do you build up that network when you're starting from zero?
Well, you don't avoid all of them, right? You know which ones, hey, you know which ones that are more likely to invest, but you definitely don't want to bring it up in large social circles. I find like a barbecue would be a bad idea, because like if the tone of the conversation is why Tesla or Bitcoin is a really great conversation, and no one in that room actually has the educational background to be making those comments, where they don't understand actually what crypto is or what the technology is behind it. So if that's the nature of your conversations, the fact that you're going to come in and just explain to them how simple and easy and transparent and how great of investment like a big apartment building is compared to that, it's not going to go anywhere, because they're not looking at that. They're looking at, oh, did you know cryptocurrency went up 100x this year? Like, oh, so you're going to offer them a 2x after 7 years? Yeah, good luck trying to compete with that, right? Like, it doesn't matter all the other fundamentals, and hey, Bitcoin can also go down 100x next year, so that doesn't matter. They don't look at it like that. So I try to with my closer family and circle, because obviously that's where we all start off. Like you realize that you want to separate them if the conversations needs to be had, and you need to really, really like walk them through the process one-on-one, where they can feel really comfortable about doing this. And just realize that certain people are never going to feel comfortable about doing this. They need to have their own bad experiences, and they need to realize why this is a better option than, a portfolio that, or 100% of a portfolio that your advisor might do for you, because they're going to be weary about doing something like this.
Yeah. And I wrote down like three follow-up questions for that. So one of the things you said was people need to have their own bad experience. And I got like this burning thing in my head, right? So I got a few people I talked to, and I'm just like, I'm trying to shorten their learning curve, right? I'm just like, look, I did the single family thing. I did the small multifamily thing. Now I'm doing the big multifamily thing. The big multifamily thing is way better in every single way. And they're just, they can't bite into it. They can't, get on board. And okay, a couple months goes by, and then I check in. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? What's your investment like? What were you educating on? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, I'm buying, turnkeys in Missouri, single family. I'm just like, oh my God, please tell me you didn't wire the money yet. And they're like, oh yeah, I got 2 of them. I'm so excited. I'm like, okay, well, call me in 6 months after you lose all your money, after you realize that, you just bought, lipstick on a pig that probably isn't even there, or like half condemned or something like that. And it's like, yeah, they just, a lot of people, they just have to, they got to take their own bumps and bruises, but it is what it is. And then, but another way, for when I'm networking and I'm talking to people and they're kind of on the fence, and even the savvier investors that, they're good at the stock market. They know they have, they have ETFs. They've done, other things. They've done more than just giving their money to like Edward Jones or some kind of financial advisor. Like they're actually picking out their own stocks or funds or ETFs or something like that. And they're trying to get them into real estate, and not getting across that non-marketed security thing, and getting past that. And it's like, look, I always refer back to what you were saying early at the beginning here of like Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm like, go back and read Rich Dad Poor Dad. Go back and read Cash Flow Quadrant. These are the things, and that this is exactly those things in that book where he was saying that like they, his rich dad and his friend would go, and he would go over the house, and they would like, sorry, Robert, you can't come in the room. You're not allowed to see this stuff because it's, for accredited investors only. And that was obviously before the Jobs Act and stuff like that, before 506B came out. But it was like, this is why the rich get richer. This stuff isn't new. It's just available to us now. It's becoming more mainstream because of technology, because the laws changed a little bit and allowed, the door to be opened up wider. But this is the stuff this is why the rich have been getting richer for the last, hundreds of years, because of these non-marketed securities, because the SEC, and whatever, back in the early 1900s, like banned, common people from getting into these type of assets. And it wasn't until the Jobs Act where, they allowed, sophisticated investors to come in and participate. And that has really opened up the eyes and kind of educating them on like, this is why you haven't heard about any of this stuff. It's not that it's new. It's just that it's becoming more available. So that usually helps out a lot in that education piece when you're going out and networking and building your investor circle. So you have some experience building investor circles, and from your bio, it said you built investment clubs first, and then that kind of sounds like it morphed into a fund. So what is what was your investment club all about? How did it start? Where did it go? What are the pros and cons of doing an investment club?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And there's obviously so much I think you just said that I do want to hit on. Like the Jobs Act has only been around since 2012. And like you said, that whole private thing, like before what it came over and over in my research, these were considered like country club investments. So basically where the operator would spend an enormous amount of time at like golf clubs and country clubs, because that's where they could be pitching these deals, because they know they're surrounded by accredited investors. So the whole Jobs Act really, really transformed that, where they could kind of advertise their services and everything like that. So it's amazing that it's only been around a decade at this point. And I've been around it for about half that time. And I think the explosion is like exponential with the amount of operators going on. So, it's a two-edged sword where I'd also be careful because you're also getting a lot of, operators that are just like, oh, I just did a boot camp. I did, 1 week boot camp. I'm submitting an offer on a 200 unit. So you, as an investor in these type of deals, you need to be very mindful where, you should at minimum spend a lot of time networking and educating. And the investment club, this is where kind of like investment club kind of comes in. What happened was, I think I made my first syndication investment, I think in 2018. The one thing with private securities is they're pretty expensive to set up, especially going through from my own fund and knowing the cost for every investor that I do have. They're decently expensive. So there's a reason why the minimums aren't like $1,000, because there's like break-even points where between the filing fees and the partnership returns and everything like that, where it just doesn't make sense to go under a certain amount. So the private securities do have a pretty high minimum. Usually, from my experience, the minimum's around $50,000. So what an investment club allows you to do is, instead of say, hey, let's say example, me, I want to go out and I want to build a portfolio, a well-diversified portfolio of apartment buildings. And I want to invest in an apartment building in Texas and in Maryland and in Tennessee, let's say, for example. Now, instead of going in and buying 3 different deals, right? If you network with, 1 or 2 other investors that are accredited, what you could do is you could join forces, and as long as all of you guys are actively participating. Now, it's a key that anybody in the investment club, if they have ownership in the LLC, that they are all actively participating. And there are different ways of structuring the LLC, but the way that I did it for the investment club is it was just a simple 3 people got together. We created one LLC, one operating agreement, and we all agreed to be actively involved. And we all pulled in an equal amount, and we all gave the green light for any deals that we all decided to invest in. But what that allowed us to do was triple our bandwidth. It actually even more than tripled our bandwidth. So instead of each one of us doing an individual deal, I think in the span of 2-3 years, we did like 10 deals because we were able to, join forces between the capital events and everything like that. So the learning curve was 10x, I think, if I would have just been solo this whole time. Now, some of the negatives obviously is there's partnership returns. You got to file 1065s for each one of the investment club. Sometimes there were deals that were crossed out that I really wanted to do, but since one of my partners said no on it, it was like almost like a Shark Tank every time we wanted to invest in a deal where we had to convince the other people. And in hindsight, it also worked out really well because some of those deals that they nixed turned out to be worse deals because they saw something I didn't. So investment club really allows you to do that. It allows you to pool your resources, not only your money, but also allows you to pool your time and the expertise of the people who are around you. It's definitely not something you rush into. I call it dating. So I spent 6 to 9 months at that point with my partners before we actually formed this, actually going into deals that we might invest in. So we spent, 6 to 9 months of exchanging emails and Slack channels and everything like that. But if you do it right and you have years of where you could pool your resources, I think it will leave you in a much better place than if you do everything solo.
Absolutely. That was a lot. So that is the club, is that the same thing as the fund? Did the club transform into the fund?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's exactly what happened. And once we had, double-digit amount of syndications, once we kind of realized, all right, these are the golden rules we need to really follow. This is what to avoid, and then we kind of filtered out of the investment club the best of the best operators. And we're like, okay, there's a lot of value here because I was investing at that point. By the time I founded the fund, I've been invested in, traditional assets for almost 20 years, and I still couldn't find a good income solution. I did the whole, dividends and utilities and bond funds, and every single time I tried one of those strategies, it failed miserably. So what I realized was that the stock market is a great appreciation play if you set it and forget it. And you don't sell during the downturns. But in terms for income, I will really need to focus on the alternative side to get income that I can actually rely on. And the simple reason is this. What I learned is after all those strategies failed, the same thing happened over and over again. What's usually cited as a big pro to the stock market is the fact that you have access to your money at all times. So that's unlimited liquidity. And what happens is unlimited liquidity leads to unlimited volatility. So one downturn will, could take out years of yield. So what I realized is that liquidity leads to volatility, and volatility kills yield. So once I realized this, it didn't really matter. Then my focus wasn't traditional or alternative. My focus was like, okay, what side of my portfolio doesn't give me unlimited liquidity? And that's the alternative. They're private securities. They're harder to move. So when I came to this realization, I realized, okay, I have my traditional side. I have some liquidity there. That's good. I don't want to have a portfolio with no liquidity. But now my alternative side, hey, I have a little liquidity, but I have this consistent yield I could kind of almost bank on. And at the same time, it actually lowered my entire portfolio's volatility when I started merging the two, alternative and traditional, and stopped looking at them as separate portfolios.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that family office stuff. Once you start talking to those type of family office investors, like or fund managers, like this is stuff that they've been, like I said earlier, like this is stuff that it's not new, right? It's just, it's just becoming more mainstream because they've been doing this stuff for years and years and years. Like you said, the family offices and the country club kind of investors, like it's been around forever. Now we're just a lot more people are going getting educated on it. A lot of more operators are offering access to deals like this, and it's I think this is the way of the future. I love it. I love where we're going, especially now that technology is making it easier when you got platforms like Syndication Pro and Groundbreaker and InvestNext and all these that just make offering and doing the paperwork and the filings that much easy and smoother with the SEC. It's I love where we're going with this industry.
Dennis, we've been talking quite a bit about kind of taking your lumps along the route towards reaching all your financial goals. What would you say is like the single most or biggest mistake that you've made, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So it's definitely that single family rental. I think it was 2012 when I bought it, and like it makes me like almost really upset that it was 2012. Like I almost wish I bought it in a downturn, and I was like, oh, okay, and I could just blame the market for my stupidity on that deal. But I can't. Like I literally bought it at a time where I could take that money and just throw it in the air, and it would have returned more money for me. So like investment wise, wow, I think I held on to that thing for 8 years, and I think it depreciated like 25% on me. It was such a bad deal, and literally could have done anything else, and I would have 5x my money at that time from 2012. Just such a great age to have invested in all this stuff. And I even have a breakdown in my book. I know, Vincent, this is something you were talking about, how much better it is than to invest in like a single family, like syndications is. Like I gave this example. I was like, okay, take 50,000, buy a low income housing, all cash. That's great. Your total expenses, let's say, is going to be $400 a month between utilities and your property tax, no mortgage, right? You get in there for someone for $1,000, and you think you're killing the cash flow at $600 a month. But once you factor in reserves, property management, then you start eking out $100-$200 on a non-mortgage property. And I made this example. So that's example A. Or B, you take $50,000 and you invest it in a $100 million property. You own maybe 0.0003% of that property, but you have professional property management. You're still cash flowing the same amount. You're never dealing with any tenants. And then it's like, do you see the difference? And that's kind of like, but you have to, you can't just listen to someone saying like, oh, option B is better. Sometimes you need to live it. So in many ways, my worst investment is also my best investment, because if it wasn't so bad, I might have not gotten into all the other stuff that I did learn about later on. So it kind of is like, you need that bad experience to really motivate you to know that there's a better way.
Yeah. Let me jump in real quick. So I got a story on that too. It's like, for I had 20 single family or small multifamily, the sub 5 units. And I just remember it was like every 6 months, like something would happen and would just set me back, wipe out my cash flow for like the year. Like I had this one duplex, right? And it's great duplex and all this stuff. And it was like, November, furnace goes out on a Saturday at, 3 a.m. or something like that. And in the winter at, in the north. And it's like, okay, $6,000 bill like coming out of my desk on Tuesday. And it's like, well, okay, well, how much cash flow just like that was the entire year. Okay, it's December or November, and the entire year's worth of cash flow just evaporated in one weekend. And it's like, okay, that was a fluke, right? And then it's like, 4 months later, another property. It's like, okay, the whatever water heater explodes and upstairs, and then rains downstairs, and it's like, okay, no water heater, drywall, all this stuff, and it's like, okay, that was a $3,000 bill on a single family, and it's like, okay, or on another duplex I had, and it's like, okay, that was 6 months of cash flow gone, and it's like, how many of those are you gonna hit before it's like they hit you on the head? It's like, okay, this is not as efficient as people think it is growing wealth, and it's like now. Okay, sure. Obviously, in multifamily, we still have that problem. Water heaters go bad all the time. Furnaces go bad all the time. But I got 100 doors. Like one furnace over the weekend, I'm not losing sleep over it, right? So the other 99 people are paying rent, and it's a drop in the bucket on the expense side. And obviously, we plan for it because our revenue is bigger. We have our pro forma. We can plan for things like that better. Have much higher reserves, and it's just. Living through that, and it's like, how many times you got to hit those setbacks on those expenses on the single family before it's like, yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with a buddy yesterday, so I love that you bring it up because I like dropping these little Easter eggs. So when my friends go back and listen to a podcast, they hear me talking about them. But a buddy of mine's getting ready to sell his house, and he'll probably make like 60 grand. And he was explaining to me yesterday how he's going to pay off his car and pay off his student loans. And I was like, why don't you buy an asset that pays for those things? And he's like, well, that's like $900 a month extra I can put in my pocket. He's like, my car loan's like 3%. And I was like, well, what if you were making 10, 15, 20% with that money? Now you're just making 3% less. I don't get it. But, like you said, people need to learn these things themselves. So we'll let that happen. So you talked about, you pretty much started your investing career in high school, 2004, right? What advice would you give your 20-year-old self? What were you doing at that time?
Oh, like I almost wish I flipped the switch and I learned more. I wish, my oldest brother was like into alternative assets because we have like a very brainwashing family. So once one of us gets into something, we kind of convince everybody else. So he kind of found the traditional route and kind of pushed me towards like mutual funds. I wish it was flipped because I wish, in 2012, I was already had real estate experience under my belt. I know for a fact I probably would have went. I don't even know if I would have went to college. I probably would just went like the commercial broker route and just did that first and then switch over. I feel like I feel like this is the golden age of alternative investments. It's probably just going to get better and better. Some parts going to be worse, some parts better. I wish I was in it from 2012. Like I said, it's really hard to, but I wish I wasn't starting in 2012 on the real estate side. So that's basically the only thing, because I think traditional assets, especially stocks and bonds, you could literally just do an index fund and forget it. It just took me it took me 20 years to learn that. But on the alternative asset sides, that's really where the magic happens when you can network with the right people and you can learn some basic underwriting. And once you get to the point where you can look at a deal in 5 to 7 minutes, it might take you 6 to 9 months to get to that point. But once you get to that point where you can look at an offering in 5 to 7 minutes, then the sky's the limit on how many deals you do and everything else. So that's the only thing I would have wished that I got started earlier in it.
Yeah. So peeling back the onion on that, it sounds like the big piece of advice would be self-education, and then like alternative investment classes, but then also alternative education aside from like just institutional going to college, taking Latin writing or whatever those courses they make you take. I remember taking some classes in college that I was like, what am I doing here? What does this have to do with anything that I'm even getting my undergrad for?
Yeah. And, when I started in college, when I graduated college, the first, taste of real estate I got, I don't know if this was just because it's like that car syndrome where if you start wanting like a Tesla, you start seeing Teslas all over the place, where, since I had the single family rental, I went the whole, bigger pockets route. And, I listened to probably 300-400 hours of like, not, it's a 300 to 400 episodes of Bigger Pockets. And their focus was on the smaller rentals and everything like that. So I'm not sure if it was as common. Like today, I feel like maybe because I'm in the world, that every single operator I know has a podcast and some kind of educational content. But I feel like when I was starting out in 2012, 13, 14, I feel like it wasn't that common. Like I think I got to the point where I remember I realized that I really liked this idea of syndications. And I thought Bigger Pockets was like the only real estate podcast out there. And I went through like the 300 episodes of like those little notes that they have. And I think I found like 4 syndicators from that whole group. And that's actually how I kind of started out reaching out to operators, because I thought that was the only place they would ever go to do a podcast. But that's how, like, 4 out of 300 episodes were syndicators. And, but now, the funny part is now if you probably Google those 200, 300 people that first came on Bigger Pockets, probably half of them went into the syndication world. Even some of their bigger non-syndicators have now joined the ranks and have all become, syndicators of themselves.
Yeah, my social media history is lacking, but, just the information era that we're in right now, like you said, everybody is building a brand. Well, Dennis, we want to respect your time. So what we do kind of here at the end of our podcast is I'm going to hit you with a fire round. I'm just going to shoot off some questions that may or may not have to do with real estate. Your answer may or may not have to do with real estate, whatever comes to mind.
Sure.
I'll fire them off. You'll answer them. What is the best book that you recommend other than your own?
Best book, business or personal?
Anything.
Okay, I'll throw out a one that I've been throwing out lately. Let me just make sure I don't butcher the name. It's by Gary Chapman.
Vince is checking his bookshelf. He's like, I probably got it.
No, I don't know who that is.
It is not a business book, but it can be applied to business. One second. All right, The 5 Love Languages, The Secrets.
Oh. Yeah, I got it.
Love That Last. Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's in a couple of masterminds that I'm a part of, it's been recommended.
Yeah,
and
my filter is covering it. I got it right here.
There you go. I just think that book is super important. Many times, especially when you're building out your brand and your business and you're doing this on the side of a W-2 job, you kind of neglect the people who are most important to you. So I think reading that book and giving you that perspective that, it doesn't mean anything if you get $10,000 and go through a divorce and, not talk to your kids. So I think you got to have a balanced approach. And I also think that book can apply to partnerships and everything like that, because I think every single deal I have has some kind of different partnership structure with different people. So knowing that they might value something, like I'm a big connector, I'm an optimist. I like to look at a deal. Like I know my strengths aren't into the details, and a lot of my partners are. So we complement each other. But I want to make sure, like when you read that book, you realize that your partner might not value the same things that you do. So it makes sure that you are hitting your share of the work, and making sure that they realize that, and making sure that you guys are on the same page at all times. Because sometimes you could just think like, hey, I have the world's greatest partnership, and your partner might be like seething and really upset that, you didn't go out and, check in on the property when you had a reason that came up, something like that. So I think that book puts that in perspective, that knowing your relationships is just as important as how knowledgeable and how great you are, in making money.
All right. What is your superpower?
Connecting and networking. In 2-3 years, I've gone from like 0 to like having a really good base now. I think it's just about, always providing value to someone else, and, always don't think of it as improving your bottom line. Just think about it as like, hey, if you can make that other person, slightly better, they'll come back around. And when I was writing the book, I had some really big, guest names actually say yes. And in a million years, I didn't think they would. So the way I structured my book is it goes intro into the actual topic, but then it goes into 2 Q&As. And I knew my book was going to depend on the quality of those Q&As, and, the ability to network and have relationships with these people for them to finally say yes to you was, huge.
Yeah, this is a human capital business, but I like that. You never know until you ask. You'd be surprised what you can get.
Yeah.
For the busy working professional who's trying to get financial freedom, I know you touch a little bit on FIRE. But what advice would you give them?
So two things. A, start now, and that there's tons of options. The second thing, especially with the early retirees, is to really don't focus in on a checklist of things that you want to do when you're done working. Focus in on your after work life. I think there's too many times where people are like, well, I'm going to go travel and catch up on Netflix and homeschool when they're done working, right? And then what happens is you can only travel so much, and then you come home. You can only binge so much, and then you're done with your Netflix queue. And then you might turn out to really hate your homeschooling experience, and you might send your kids off, and now you're sitting around all day with nothing to do. So I think it's important. Like for me, commercial real estate really took that on, where I look at all these different projects I get to work on. I get to partner with some awesome people, and that is going to be my afterlife, so to say. But I think too many people focus in on like a checklist, and they'll cross off that checklist, and then they'll have issues after that.
I like that. Finally, how can our audience connect with you?
So if you're looking for the book, the best place is Amazon, the Alternative Investment Almanac by Denis Shapiro. But if you're looking to connect with me directly, sihcapitalgroup.com is the best way to do it. I have 2 abridged versions of my book. So if you're not in the mood to read 300 pages, it's only 30 pages. I did an abridged version of the Q&As, and then I did an abridged version of the actual content. So you can find that all on my website. I also, on the educational side, I have about 30, 40 different articles just on stuff that we just talked about now. So, but the best place is sihcapitalgroup.com.
Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure talking with you today, Dennis. Enjoyed having you on.
Same here, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
You too.
Well, even the for those of us that are dipping our toe in the crypto world, right? We got like the paper hands and diamond hands thing. It's like a tweet from Elon Musk or China will take out 50% of your of your cryptos and or whatever they're called, and it's and it's like, okay, yeah, that crypto does offer that unlimited liquidity, but it's like, you look at any crypto from like, May to like July and see what that leads to. 2021, May 2021 to July 2021. And you'll see what I'm talking about of, somebody writes a tweet or a foreign government comes out with, a new policy reiteration, and all of a sudden, trillions of dollars of value get vaporized in a matter of weeks. So it is pretty incredible what the risk adjusted return that real estate gives you. It may not be the sexiest thing. You're not going to be, driving Lambos by Christmas, but you're going to get a risk adjusted return that is by far better than most anything the stock market has to offer, with amazing tax benefits that are nowhere else in any other category that we've found anywhere in investing world. So
I always encourage people to do a little research on the Sharpe ratio whenever they start telling me they're making X, Y, and Z on, ABC, alternative coin, and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Sharpe ratio for risk adjusted returns is, that'll cut through a lot of that of what you're really at risk to get that return. So anyway, so if you're interested in connecting with us, go to tricityequitygroup.com to learn more, to connect with like-minded investors, join our Facebook group, Honolulu Multifamily and more. And if you found value in this podcast, please subscribe and give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you know anyone that might resonate with today's podcast, please share the episode with them. See you next time. And also, we are holding first ever mastermind event in Hawaii. This is going to be the Hawaii Millionaire Mindset Blueprint. You got the website?
Website, if you want to purchase tickets right now, you can get them kind of on an early bird special. It's going to be www.millionairesmindsetblueprint.com. July 21st to the 24th of 2022. You want to get that on your calendar. It's going to be hosted at the Four Seasons Resort in Ko'olina on beautiful Oahu, Hawaii.
Yeah, it's gonna be amazing. Multi-day event. We're going to be going over alternative investments through real estate, and then also building businesses and scaling businesses. Some much higher level stuff, the stuff that makes that generational wealth. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be talking about again multifamily investments, alternative real estate investments, buying things like franchising, scaling through franchising, because ultimately what we're trying to get is into a position where we have businesses that buy our assets, the assets pay for our liabilities, and then it's all wrapped up in vehicles like trusts and things like that, and LLCs. We employ infinite banking system. All of these high level concepts, wrap them all together in one event to get you on the framework, give you the blueprint for that generational legacy wealth. It's gonna be a whole lot of fun. We're looking forward to it. Hope to see you there.
Definitely. If you're looking for some business trips, a trip to Hawaii is not a bad place to go. Bring the golf clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. Ko'olina's world class. All right, might see President Obama out there too. We have several pictures of him on the golf course out there, so maybe you'll get lucky and see him out there. But all right, see you next time.